By November of 1914, the Great War had reached a stalemate. The Allies and Central Powers were deadlocked. Belligerent or warring countries realized that the war would be a marathon, not a sprint. This meant countries had to shift from a short-term strategy to a long-term strategy. This did not just affect soldiers, but also affected citizens outside the military, because in order to win a long-term war, a leader needed a productive economy to support the military. Countries needed to inspire citizens to focus on producing more ships, guns, food, ammunition, and medicine for war. Leaders tried to raise morale by making inspiring newspaper headlines for even small victories. Leaders also used propaganda, which were ideas or ads used to send out an influential positive message and create hope, and they used propaganda to portray the enemy as beastly or inhuman. Propaganda was aimed at convincing citizens to stay in the war, because making peace with a beastly or inhuman enemy would seem unthinkable. Another adjustment to a long-term war came on the actual battlefield. By 1915, the war on the Western Front became a war of attrition, where each side tried to wear down the other by constant attacks. These constant attacks caused both sides to dig trenches or ditches to protect themselves. Trenches on the Western Front stretched for over 500 miles, from Switzerland to the North Sea. The Allied troops on the Western Front, made of Great Britain and France, made one trench system, while German troops made their own. In this aerial photograph from World War I, you can see German trenches in the bottom right-hand corner and Allied forces trenches in the upper left. Soldiers had to live in trenches under horrible conditions for weeks and sometimes for months. In the trenches, they struggled with boredom, terror, disease, rats, mud, and nearly constant firing and shelling from enemies. Have you heard of the term shell-shocked? We usually use it to describe someone who is stunned from something, but the term originally comes from trench warfare in World War I, where soldiers who were constantly exposed to enemy fire suffered from traumatic shock. If you look at this image of an injured World War I soldier, you see the man on the left exhibiting a classic symptom of shell shock, the 1,000-yard stare. Trenches were protected with landmines and barbed wire. The land between trenches of opposing sides was called no man's land, and it varied from a half-mile to just a few short yards. In order to attack, soldiers charged over the top, as you see in this picture, of their own trenches through no man's land toward enemy trenches. Usually, attacking soldiers got trapped in the barbed wire and were easily killed by enemy's machine guns, which first appeared in World War I. Also during this period, Germans introduced chlorine gas, a poisonous yellow-green gas that caused blindness, choking, vomiting, torn lungs, and death. The Allies soon quickly adopted gas too, and both sides used gas masks to protect themselves from the poisonous air. Trench warfare made battles longer, casualty rates higher, defense easy, and offense nearly impossible. There were many casualties throughout 1915 with the rise of trench warfare. We're going to look at two battles that occurred during trench warfare on the Western Front and killed many men. They're called the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. At the Battle of Verdun in February of 1916, German forces staged a surprise attack on French forces at a fortress in northeastern France. French troops, rallying to the battle cry, "They shall not pass," held off the Germans, who eventually ended their attack after months. However, Verdun is one of the bloodiest battles of the war, as both sides suffered over 500,000 casualties. At the Battle of Somme, British and French forces were in the offensive and the Germans were on the defensive. Allied troops attacked Germans along the Somme River Valley in northern France beginning in July of 1916, and the battle lasted until November. Somme was just as costly and deadlocked as the Battle of Verdun. 500,000 Germans, 400,000 British, and 200,000 French died as the Allied advance failed. Also at this battle, the British introduced their new weaponed armored vehicle called the tank. World War I was proving to be an expensive and bloody war. Trench warfare made it clear that the winner of World War I would be the side that was able to outlast the other, not necessarily overpower the other. Trench warfare also showed that military firepower had developed quicker than military mobility, meaning armies were able to use destructive new weapons like tanks, chlorine gas, and machine guns, but they had not yet developed the technology or the strategy to attack around these new technologies.